What's up, guys? I'm up here in Newtonville, Ontario. The day has come. I've always wanted to put together an engine, my own engine. Been working on this project for a few months now. This is a big step in the project here. I'm up here in Newtonville, Ontario at Busche's garage, and he's gonna help me put this thing together today. So that's coming up right now on Saturday's Wrench.
Welcome to Saturday's Wrench.
Yeah. Wrenchity-roo, wrench-roo. Alright guys, I'm here in Jeff Busche's garage. This is Busche's garage up here at Newtonville. And this is Jeff. We've got all the parts laid out on the bench here. We're going through, we're just checking up everything, making sure that everything's sound to put back into the engine here. And this is Jeff. Say hi.
Hi folks.
This is Jeff.
This is going to be fun. I'm looking forward to this. I always appreciate when people learn the knowledge and do it themselves. I'm always willing to help people that are helping themselves.
Absolutely.
So so we've got everything laid out here. We're going to go through it all and inspect it, and then go from there.
He's using a flywheel puller to pull the alternator off. We're going to check out the starting clutch, make sure that everything's okay. So just explain to me quickly how this works, Jeff.
Okay, well this is the rotor for your generator system to charge the battery.
Okay.
And this is where the permanent magnets are. And it attaches to the end of the crank, which has a taper. So there's a taper like this, and then there's a corresponding taper on the inside of this.
Oh, right, yep.
And then if you can see in there, you can see it's threaded, and you can see the bull nose of the end of the crank at the end.
Okay.
So when we put this puller in, it will push up against the end of the crank, and once you get enough pressure on the bolt on the end of the crank, it will release the taper and allow this to come off.
Cool.
Oh.
There you go. Pretty easy.
Yeah, well, when you have
easy,
the right tools.
Yeah, there you go, yeah.
That's the secret.
Oh, I see that. Okay,
there's the taper right there, and there's actually a keyway, because the taper doesn't have enough strength to keep it from spinning. So there's
look at that
key right there, and
definitely don't want to be losing that, guys.
No. Oh, they are. You can purchase new ones, but it's best to keep them. And then that key goes into the keyway here, right? And so that keeps it from spinning on the end of the crank.
Cool.
And then what we're going at to inspect is the one-way starter clutch. So there's a chain that goes from the starter motor, basically.
Absolutely, I'm familiar.
Yep. And then so when you engage the starter, it spins the motor this way.
Yep.
And then once the motor starts, it's able to freewheel like this.
Oh, cool.
So it's basically a one-way clutch.
Uh-huh.
And then when you pull it apart, there's three small, let's see if I can make them.
Oh, look at that.
So there's three small pins like this here, and a spring. Of course this isn't going to work.
They're a little tricky to get out, eh?
Okay, so this is what we're looking at inside there. So this little spring goes into the, I don't know if you're going to be able to see this on the video, but you can sort of see what I'm getting at. This spring
I totally see
and
it,
plunger push against this ball, and that's what actually locks up the movement of this part in one direction and allows it to freewheel in the other
direction.
And this is a fairly common thing that you find on old Hondas, especially I'm not sure we're going to be able to see this or not. What happens is that grunge in the oil gets between these two surfaces and marks it up, and these need to be perfectly smooth, otherwise they skid across the surface, and that's what causes you to push the starter button, it'll go and catch kind of thing.
I see.
The other thing that you have to really look at, and it's pretty common on these, is But if you look carefully as I turn it, you can actually see
like a pattern in
flat
there.
spots and dents, and those that's caused by this pin sliding slightly and then catching, and eventually it puts a little dent in there, and then it keeps finding the same dent and making it deeper. Now this one actually is not that bad. I've seen way worse. This can be resurfaced with sandpaper to eliminate the high spots, and then with new pins it'll pretty much resurrect this mechanism.
Cool.
I'm not sure, did you use the starter motor before you took the motor apart?
I didn't actually, no.
Okay, so it's quite possible that this may have been intermittent.
Okay.
Just from what I can see, the damage that's on there.
Okay.
Sometimes you can't get these parts.
Right.
There's certain bikes where they just don't make them anymore. The pins generally are available.
Right.
But this particular gear on a lot of models nowadays, you can't get them
find
anymore. So
Unless
you have to
resurrect it from a
refurbish
different
it.
engine or something.
We'll have to refurbish that surface, and you should get new pins.
Okay.
The spring and the cup, this here, it'll be fine. Those don't basically wear out.
Okay.
But the pin and this surface here are the wear items on that particular
Okay. All right. So good to know.
So now this is one of the main crank bearings. This is a ball bearing, this one here. Now this crank, it looks like it's been wiped off, but it's obviously hasn't been cleaned, because before this is reused, these have to be cleaned so that all those cages and everything are perfectly clean and shiny and everything.
Okay.
Then there's another type of bearing on the crank. This one here, which is actually called a needle bearing. And if you look in the gap there, you can see that it has a series of flat rollers like this.
Right, yep.
Inside there.
Yep.
And as opposed to...
It's like these two on the ends.
Yeah, that's right. And as opposed to a ball bearing.
Right.
So it's just a different kind of bearing to handle the different kinds of loads.
Okay.
Now, we're kind of looking at the crank here, so I'll just keep going. So you also have to make sure you inspect the connecting rods, both the big end and the small end bearing.
Right.
Now, before we started doing this, I grabbed a hold of it and gave it a tug to see. And because I'm a machinist, I have micrometer fingers, so I can feel by moving it and wiggling the top of the rod. I'm not sure if that's going to show up, but you can see that there's only mere thousandths of an inch of movement.
For sure.
In the manual, they have you block this up on V blocks and use a dial indicator and put it on there and actually measure this.
Right.
And I would do that if I felt more clearance here, but by moving the rod laterally back and forth like this, I can feel the clearance between the rod and the flywheel of the wheel of the crank. I'm pulling up and down like this to see if I can feel any movement at all. There's absolutely none in this rod.
Okay, good.
And then by rocking the top, you get kind of a feel for the overall clearance.
Right.
And I can say for sure that both of these rods are just fine.
Perfect.
The whole crank needs to be vigorously cleaned. It's still filthy, in my opinion.
Yeah, okay.
But, you've done a good job so far.
Cool, man. So we just moved over to the other bench here. It's a little easier to see, but Jeff's just going to, a little better light. But Jeff's just going to go ahead and show us the transmission here, what to look for, kind of like stuff like that, Jeff? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, so I'll just sort of using the top case just to kind of point out where these things go. Obviously, the crank mounts in here, and then the transmission mounts right here. You've got your main shaft here, and the counter shaft goes here. And then this mechanism is the shift drum, and these actually move, and that's what moves the gears on the shafts in order to change into the different gear ratios from first up to fifth and so on. Perfect.
Fourth in this case.
That's all right.
What I'm going to do is start off with the counter shaft.
Okay.
The counter shaft is the one that the sprocket is on and drives your drive chain in the rear wheel.
Right.
So things to look at are the bearings should be inspected. So things to look at are the bearings. You want to make sure that they're sparkling clean. This needs to be cleaned as well before it's assembled. You need to make sure that there's no grumbliness and that the bearings don't move at all.
Right.
And that there's no movement or anything. This one feels really good. You need to go through and make sure that all the gears move smoothly on the shaft. So these are moving nice and smooth, and all the gears turn. There's no tight spots or anything like that.
Right.
So those are the basic things to check. This is a needle bearing right here. Once again, it has to be cleaned before it's put together, but same idea. It needs to be checked, make sure it's not loose, there's no grumbliness or anything in there. Now on the gears themselves, the things that you want to look at, one of the most common problems with gears is the face of the engagement dogs. So right here, that face will engage with this face right here when you put it in gear.
Squeeze it together.
And now, okay, these are actually straight cut. So what you want to look for is the ends being bent, smushed. There's a technical term. Smushed over. So what happens if you're not, especially on old bikes, modern bikes like 2010 bikes, everything's really precise and you can do very quick shifts. But on these old girls, you need to do a methodical step-by-step shift. You can't just like jam it into gear.
Right.
And so I see a fair amount the edges of the engagement dogs worn off, but I can see from this one here that it hasn't been abused. So you can, if you get the light right, I'll just twist it so that maybe you can see the reflection right there. You can actually see the wear point where the two pieces touch each other.
I see, yeah.
You see how it's shiny and then dark. And so no, this is a beautiful transmission. It hasn't been abused. See, on modern bikes, this surface is at 90 degrees basically to this surface.
Okay.
On modern bikes, they do what's called undercutting. So the surface is cut at an angle. I'm exaggerating it here, but it's undercut. And the reason they do that on both sides is that once the gear engages, the pressure from one gear to the next literally pulls the gears together and keeps them from ever being able to jump out. Plus, if you do a quick shift on a more modern bike and it only engages about here, when you get the power on, it'll pull itself together. And that's what I was saying about older classic bikes. You need to ride them, I guess, methodically, and do your shift, clutch move, clutch out kind of thing in a methodical way. And that's why, because the straight cut on there, you have to be precise with your shifting. So that's one kind of engagement dog here, these ones. The other kind is this here, and you can see there's like a round peg coming out of the movable gear, and then that engages with a hole in the other gear. And so the thing to look for on these is on the engagement side, which would be right here. Once again, I'll move it. I think you can see the reflection where it's actually contacting on this gear. So that's what you want to look at, and if this is smeared over from inaccurate, lazy shifting, then that'll make this no good. Now, you can have these resurfaced, and if you find a good machinist, he should be able to, you can even have these undercut for racing applications and so on.
Let's see.
And then, I'm not sure if you can see it in here. This area right here is where that pin engages. So that's where you want to look again, is for this rounded off, like that. And so, but no, this bike hasn't been abused by the shifter.
Yeah, I thought they looked like they're pretty good shape, so.
Yeah, no, you've got a nice engine. This is a really great place to start. Absolutely. Okay, so that's the two transmission shafts, your counter and your main.
Cool.
The clutch goes on this side here, and then obviously the clutch connects to the crank. All right, now this monstrosity is the shift barrel, or shift drum. And it goes in here. I'm not actually going to take this apart, but it goes in there. And in order to be able to have these end up in the middle so that they're connecting with the transmission gears that go here, these have to be able to come off. And so what they do is, on a different style of transmission, the shift forks look actually more kind of like that. And they have a pin which connects to this groove, and this is actually how the bike shifts. This groove here, when the pin is installed in there, it follows that groove. So that's what actually moves the shift fork back and forth, which gives you this movement here to change. As you turn that, so you
as your foot hits the clutch or the gearing, right? The transmission, then that turns that
That's
drum,
right. So
right? Yeah.
if
So there you go.
you're, now I can't remember exactly which way it is, but it's something like this. Let's say that's first. So
Right.
if you're in neutral, there's this hole in the top of the case right here.
Right.
Is
That's
where
what
your
that
spring plunger goes down
Into.
from the top of the engine, and the spring plunger basically engages with this end of the mechanism and makes it turn from one stop to the next.
It's amazing
as
how it
you're
works,
moving
isn't it?
the shift lever up
So
and down.
the spring there at the top, on the top of the engine there, just it holds it in place, kind of.
Yes, that. Now, right off the top of my head, I can't remember exactly where it is. Oh, right here. Lord. Okay, so that detent lines up with this hole here,
Yeah.
and from the top of the engine, there's a hollow
Ball. And,
like nut with a spring and a ball,
yeah.
and so the spring goes in there. So when you're in neutral, it holds it at that point right there.
right.
And so basically this pin, which goes in here, will go into this groove.
Yep.
So in neutral, it'll be sitting there. You stick it in first gear. This turns and puts it into the first gear position,
Which pushes
which
the
is
rod.
over. You can see how it moves
Exactly.
over.
Yep.
And then same thing as it turns, you go through neutral up into second, and it just happens that this particular shift fork, it only moves the one gear over one. It's either in first or second.
Just amazing how they figure that out, isn't it? It's
Yeah,
just so beautiful.
well,
It's pretty
engineering
cool.
at its
Yeah,
finest.
it's just amazing.
So anyway, that's basically the transmission in a nutshell right there.
Great,
and the
man.
things to look at. And really, with all things when you're inspecting it, you're looking for wear, something that's smeared over or lines,
Doesn't look right.
rust, loose. If bearings, if you can feel that they're loose, they're no good.
Right. Cool. Well, thanks for showing me that, Jeff. That was really insightful. And you can see how the transmission, it's really important to check all this stuff. It's the last thing you want to do is button up your engine and then have to go back and take it apart because you forgot something or something's not right. So thanks again, man. That was cool. So we're just, Jeff's just going to go over the cylinder head and the cylinders here. We're just going to check everything, and he's just going to kind of just go through what maybe you should look for.
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly. Okay, so this is the cylinder barrel, and obviously it goes on top of the upper crankcase. And so this is where your cam chain runs through this here, and each of these holes is where the pistons go up and down, and that's where all the fun comes from. So when you're rebuilding an engine, generally speaking, these poor old girls have been sitting around for a long time. Nobody bothered oiling the cylinders and stuff, and so you're going to get lines of rust that form inside the cylinder, or you might even end up with a seized piston,
Right.
or it could just be worn out because the piston will wear and give you too much clearance, and then you start losing performance and so on. So those would be the kind of reasons why you would have the cylinder rebored. Now, I didn't ask you this before, but I believe you're using a big bore piston.
Yep.
Is that correct? So this is significantly larger than the original cylinder size. So you're going to have a larger than 350cc motor,
That's
which will
the
be great.
point.
It's going to be big bore for sure. So the process basically for a big bore, generally speaking, there's so much material has to be taken out of the cylinder in order to get it big enough that it has to be bored and then honed. And so, I'm not sure what's the best way. I look at them like this with the light, because it allows you to, if you can see if you go on a bit of an angle. Can you
it's
see the
cross
hatches?
Yep.
Okay, and that's called honing. And what it does is make the hole perfectly round and also perfectly straight. So when the person's doing the job for you, you have to hope that he's a professional and that he's going to make it so that it's not tapered this way and that your hole is perfectly round. Excuse me, that has to be checked using these instruments here. So this is a micrometer. Then the micrometer is used to measure the piston diameter. When you measure a piston, you don't measure it here, you don't measure it there, you don't measure it here. You measure it right about here. Okay. So approximately a centimeter up from the bottom of the piston skirt.
Okay.
So when you measure, I have this one pre-measured already. So basically at that point there, You just adjust your micrometer until you have a small amount of drag, and then that gives you you read it off on here. There's a vernier scale, so this is 2.656 and a quarter, I think is what that reads. I don't have glasses on.
Sure, no problem.
Okay, so you need to do that in order to determine the piston to wall clearance, which is really important. If it's too big, then you get all the fun power going past the rings. If it's too tight, it'll seize as soon as you start it up,
Right.
And so on. So there's a specified clearance in the manual, and you should stick with it. In order to properly measure the barrel, you have to use an instrument like this. This is called a dial bore gauge. So basically you put it into the bore and then the needle moves. So in order to check it, the clearance, what I'm going to do is set the dial bore gauge. So I very gently put my instrument in the vise, and then I use the micrometer as a gauge to set the dial bore gauge. So now you can see, if you look at the dial there, as I rock the micrometer, we have the dial set at 0. So when that dial is at 0, it means that it's exactly the same measurement as I measured the piston. Okay, so now this represents the piston. So now when I put this into the bore, I'll put it in a bit of an angle like that, and then pull it back until we get to 0. Now, you'll see that it doesn't come all the way up to 0. And why is that? Because the bore is bigger than the piston.
Okay.
So what we're actually directly reading here is the piston to cylinder wall clearance.
Okay.
Right? So you can see right there on the dial, we've got 1.5 thousandths of an inch of clearance. Altogether. So there's a 1/4 of a thousandth of an inch on either side of the piston skirt. Now, pistons aren't straight up and down. They're tapered from bottom to top.
Okay.
And you can actually measure it. And that's why you measure the piston here, because you want to sort of get the average.
Oh, I see.
Here.
Yep.
So in effect, there's actually far less clearance right here than there would be right there.
Wow, cool.
Okay, so whoever did these did a great job. They're really well done. And then basically, they should be measured in 6 places. So, oops, maybe I'll do it that way. So you measure at 90 degrees at the top, you measure in the middle, and you measure at the bottom, and you do it 6 ways, verifying.
I see, okay.
Verifying that you're getting the same reading.
Clearance all the way
So
through.
when you have 6 readings that are all 1.5 thou clearance, then it means that you have a perfectly straight and circular bore.
Right.
So that's nice. Yeah, and these pistons are beautiful.
Yeah, check
these
these
are
out.
like a work of art.
Yeah, they're really nice.
Look at the machining on there, and these are higher compression, big bore pistons, so it'll be 94 octane premium only for this baby.
Sexy engine right there.
Yeah, I'm impressed. Those are very nice. I'm a machinist by trade as well, so
There you
I
go.
can tell those are
They're
nice.
Busche approved.
They are. The other thing with pistons that you have to worry about is the rings.
Right.
Now this is really important, because this can cause all kinds of big problems. I'm not going to do them all, but I'll give you a general idea of what to look for. When you're taking the old pistons and inspecting them to see if you can reuse them or not, there are several things you have to measure and determine if they're still within spec. So this is the iron number 2 compression ring, and it goes in this groove right here. So
Second groove or the middle groove?
the middle groove.
Okay.
The actual top compression ring is chrome.
Okay.
Okay, you can see that.
Oh,
it's
yeah.
a chrome ring, so
Okay.
that's your top compression, second compression, and then the oil ring is built up out of 3 components, which are 2 rails
okay.
and an expander spring. Basically, the oil ring is built up out of these 3 components.
You
So
sandwich
there's
that
the,
little spring
the
there.
spring and on either side, and like that, and then the whole thing goes in the groove, and you have to make sure that you separate the gap for the spring and the rings themselves. So basically, when I put it together, I generally put them kind of like,
Like kind of like a peace
that,
sign,
so
a little bit.
A third of around the circle each time.
Right.
Yeah, peace sign's a great way to describe it. Okay, so when you're measuring a used piston, you need to get a feeler gauge and put your ring in, and then figure out what the actual clearance is.
Right.
Is the easiest way to do it. Now, obviously, this is a brand new piston, a brand new ring, and you can see just by how much that moves at the top of this distance, it's probably just fine.
Okay.
I'll double check it before we install, but
Sure.
this is more just to tell you what you need to look at. So all 3 sets of rings should be checked. When you look at the ring lands, you should look at them in really good light so that you can see if they're worn and if there's grooves and stuff in there.
Right.
It's very common for carbon to get built up on the back of the ring lands here.
Oh yeah.
And no, it's not actually the tension of the ring in the cylinder that causes the ring to seal.
Okay.
It's gas on the top gets in behind the ring and pushes it out against the wall. So that's why it's important to make sure if there's any carbon or anything in there, and you're going to be able to reuse the piston, but new rings, you have to make sure you get all the carbon and everything out of there, because it's important that the compression gases get behind the ring to push it out.
Okay.
And also, when you're installing rings, you always have to make sure you put the letter. I'm not sure if you can see that or not. There's
Might be
an
a
N
little
on
hard
there.
to see, but yeah, it's pretty hard to see. But
Yeah,
you can take our word for it. There's
it's very obvious as
Yeah.
long as if you got poor eyesight like me because I'm old.
Would that always be at the where the open
Yes,
gap
yeah,
is?
the some kind of number or letter will always be
Okay,
right.
and that's
at the
supposed to
ring
go
gap.
up.
Up, always, yes.
Okay.
And you can see this one has it as well.
Oh wow. Okay.
Oil rings don't matter really.
Is that also because on the edge of the ring here, it's like some of them are tapered, some of them are straight,
That's
like
correct.
a 90 degree?
And to my experience, you don't see it much on 4-stroke engines. The top and bottom surface are parallel.
Okay.
At least not motorcycle engines. Some car piston applications are different, but anyway, some rings are actually wedge shaped.
Right.
A wedge shape, and so if you like a fair number of 2-stroke engines will have a different, not a parallel ring groove. So in fact, when you do that, you can't do this kind of simple thing for measuring. You have to install the ring to measure it.
Right.
But for CB350, 750s, and lots of these 70s vintage bikes, they're like this. So
Okay.
the best bet is get a proper factory manual and read it.
Absolutely.
That's, got everything and more than you'd ever want to know about doing this stuff. The other important component is the piston pin. And once again, if you're inspecting a used one, you want to look for galling in the middle where the connecting rod goes. So if you've got any kind of big lines and stuff in here, that's not good. This has to be basically what's called a running sliding fit in here.
Right.
Which means the hole in the outside of the wrist pin are basically the same size.
Right.
So they don't move, but they can slide in and out. And this has to be able to easily slide just like that right through and be free in there.
Okay.
And the reason is because the piston has to be able to rock
Exactly.
on here. And if this gets seized,
There's a lot
and
of
so on,
movement in there.
yeah, it can cause a lot of problems. And then obviously what holds that in there are the piston circlips which go in there. But I'll show how to do that when we actually assemble the engine.
That's good.
So
That's good to
that
know.
pretty much covers the cylinder.
Okay.
Like just generally speaking, whenever there's what are called knock pins, so those are little dowels that center the head on the barrel and the barrel on the cases and so on.
Yeah.
You should do your best to try and take those out and clean them. And when you put them back in, always put a bit of grease on there to keep them from rusting.
All right.
That's really for the next guy in there, but you'll appreciate it.
Yeah, for sure.
And also make sure all your mating surfaces are perfectly smooth. If there's small little scratches and stuff, or maybe you've had to pick up a used barrel at a wrecker or something, it might have a few small grooves and stuff. You can often resurface that by using like a piece of sandpaper on a flat piece of glass. This surface is a little harder to do. Another thing to make sure, and not all machinists who do this will do it, is to make sure that you chamfer the top edge of the cylinder bore, because that pretty much eliminates any chance of getting little hot spots, which will cause detonation.
Okay.
It's just good practice to do that.
Okay.
This one here's not bad. But
Cool.
no, overall, you got your money's worth for that.
Cool.
Okay, so this is the combustion chamber, and whoever did the work on this did a really good workmanlike job. He's resurfaced the mating surface between the head and the cylinder, which is good. That'll give the head gasket its best chance to do its job properly. It's nice and clean. You can see we've got new valves in here, and the seats have been cut. You can see that those are really nice new machine surfaces there, and whoever did this did a really nice job. I do this myself on engines I work on. This is a new weight cutter set. So basically, once you've installed the guide, there's a pilot like this, and this end here would go into the guide, and then there's a set of cutters. So I always do a 3-angle. So there's a 30, 45, and 60 degree right here. So those are all used in conjunction to give you the perfect mating surface between the valve and the valve seat. So basically, once this is in the guide, then this goes over top. Actually, I haven't used this one; it's still got preservative on it. But and then you gently cut the surface, and it's an art.
Yeah, it looks
like it takes lots
amazing.
of practice and
for sure.
so on. But I do it myself because I'm a machinist as well as being a motorcycle mechanic. So I can control the quality of the work in my shop by doing that. But that's basically how it's done.
Wow.
So let's see. I guess I'll just name all the parts that make up the valve train here.
Sure.
So you've got your valve. When you look at this side. So obviously you can see that's the face of the valve right there. This is the surface that meets with the valve guide itself.
Yep.
And then the stem fits inside the guide. And then, so on this side here, actually it's nice on this, you can see it. The bronze looking thing there, that's the actual valve guide, which is pressed into the head.
Right.
And then you've got your springs, and then the keepers hook on this surface right here
at the end,
with your that's nice. Those are obviously aftermarket and lightweight too.
Titanium.
Yeah, nice. So these keepers right here are what hold the whole spring together.
Yeah, just right here.
Yeah, these little things here. And also you can see here that there's a spacer installed underneath the spring.
Okay.
And that's an important thing to keep in mind when you're using aftermarket parts. Are these performance springs as well? Yeah. So they should be tested to make sure that the valve can open far enough, especially if you have a large lift cam.
Yep.
You don't want the cam to start opening the valve and then have the coil bind up and stop, because it'll break everything as soon as that happens.
Yep.
So those kind of things, when you're doing high performance work, have to all be individually checked and verified. Otherwise, you're basically throw your money into the wind and hope you can catch it. It looks like somebody's done a good job, and they've installed the proper spring seats and spacers, which gives you the right installed height, and all those different performance things are really important to take care of. I'm not going to get into that right now.
No worries, but that's pretty useful information.
But that's sometimes it's awesome that you're doing this yourself and you're actually going and seeking the knowledge, but there's sometimes things that
can't
are
do
just
at home.
Beyond your
For sure, you can't do that at home.
And it's amazing what you can get away with, but you're just flirting with death when it comes to motorcycles.
For sure.
So that's generally what goes on here. I can see that the ports themselves have been smoothed out and cleaned.
Yeah.
Which I believe is a really good thing to do. I generally clean up all the ports on heads that I do myself.
Yeah.
They come from the factory with big chunks that look like this here from the casting process inside there. And just by making sure you clean that out, it'll improve the performance. And
you're talking about mostly improved airflow. Is that mainly?
Yeah, exactly. And it can flow more air for a given amount of time if it has a smoother surface. But once again, porting is a skill and an art. And really, if you don't have a flow bench to test the head, you shouldn't be taking material out. It's okay to clean them up, but don't take material out. If you do that, you're safe to clean the ports out. And it will give you a smoother operation, especially at idle. And and probably better throttle response and so
Cool.
on as well by doing that. It's well worth the effort. The big thing
Yeah.
is don't go wild and start hogging material out. because
Right.
Then you start changing the shape of the
The
port
and everything.
believe
Yeah.
me, the factory spends millions of dollars to get that shape figured out.
Right.
And if you start changing it without a way of verifying it with a flow bench that pulls air through the head that
Yeah.
you can measure, then you're pretty much shooting in the dark.
And there you go.
So.
Cool. So these are also Jeff approved. I like that. Bush approved. This is nice. Let's see the exhaust. Pretty much the same thing.
Oh yeah, so yeah, you can actually the workings. You can see the bronze guide sticking down into the
Yeah, I
port,
can, yeah.
and then you can see the valve stem, and you can actually almost see where the face meets the seat.
Cool.
The other thing is that when you're installing guides, I frankly would suggest that unless you've done it before, you should just pay a professional to do it.
That's what I did.
Because it's, I've been doing it now for almost 30 years, so, I've got the art and the science all figured out.
Right.
But you can really easily make a big mess of it, because if you don't do it properly, you end up with the guide sitting at a big angle,
Right.
and then you go to cut the seat, and you end up having to go way deep into the head in order to get a proper seal.
Oh, okay.
And it turns into a nightmare, and then you run into problems with the valve maybe sticking too far out to be
Yeah.
able to get clearance with the rocker
Right.
arms, and blah blah blah.
So it's a real art, basically, is what you're saying.
Well, the rule of thumb is that in motors, if you change one thing, you have to make sure everything downline from that
Exactly.
is compatible.
Yep.
And that's
something
why
I've learned
it's so
also.
important to do all the checking, triple check before
Right.
you actually button it up. And when you're installing guides, and I do that as well, you have to heat the head up, you have to press the old guide out, you have to clean up the bore the new one's going into, then you install the new guide, and then once it's installed, you have to use a reamer like this to ream it to its final size.
Wow.
And if you don't have all those tools, you can't do it properly.
For sure.
So
It's a really specialized job, is what you're saying.
yes, well, all the machining aspects of engine rebuilding are a specialty.
Cool. That's all really
that
good.
pretty much covers everything you need to know. Everything should be super clean. One thing I did want to mention that I noticed is it appears like this has been sandblasted.
Yep.
And sandblasting is an excellent tool, but I've never really thought that it was a good idea to use it on
Sandblasting
heads.
on an engine. Yeah.
Actual sand
Right.
or bead glass blasting.
Yep.
The problem is that it's nearly impossible to seal everything in the head up so you don't get any of that, in effect, loose sandpaper into the innards of the everything.
Right. Yep.
And if you don't diligently clean all the oil passages and everything else, and after you've used sand or glass beading, it's not hard to end up with basically sandpaper left in the
Right.
inside your engine.
Uh-huh.
I personally use a soda blast cabinet.
Yep.
So it uses sodium bicarbonate, which is basically baking soda.
Yeah.
And the beauty of that is that it will take the patina off your part and clean it up really well, but it's gentle in its cleaning actions. And it's so gentle that if there's like ink writing on a part or something like that, it won't take that off.
Really?
But it'll remove all the patina and the dirt and everything, and it's water soluble.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
even
That's the most
if
important
you
part.
do get stuff in, and that is the most important,
Right.
as far as I'm concerned anyway. Because once you're done cleaning the part, you can take it and wash it in lukewarm soapy water with a brush, and it dissolves. Once again, just a cautionary tale, be careful
Very cool.
when you do that.
Thanks, Jeff. All right, guys. I hope you enjoyed that episode. Jeff took us through a lot of different parts of the engine, explaining what you should look for before you put it back together. I'll be honest with you, I was ready to put that engine back together when I came to his shop on this day. But I mean, I learned a lot today. I didn't know that you needed to thoroughly check so many different parts of the engine. And that would have been a really bad mistake on my part to go through and put that engine back together. A lot of things weren't even clean, and I spent a lot of time cleaning those things, and they just were not up to Jeff's standards, which is totally acceptable, and a big rookie mistake on my part. So I hope you've learned a lot from this episode. I know I sure have. These videos are going to be broken up into 3 sections. You have the checklist of what you need to look for before you start reassembling your engine. And then I'm going to go through with the bottom end with Jeff. We're going to button that part up, and then we'll move on to the top end. The top end is another couple days in itself. You need to check every part. You need to check for clearance. There's a lot of things I'm learning that I didn't know I needed to do, but I'm glad I brought it to Jeff. Busche has been helping me out a lot with the engine rebuild. So I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. I know I learned a ton from visiting his shop today. And also make sure you check out Jeff Busche's shop. It's called Busche's Garage. It's in Newtonville, Ontario. Here's the website. Check it out. He does some awesome work. He's a machinist by trade. He has tons of years of experience, over 25 years. The guy knows what he's doing, and he's been doing a fantastic job. So thanks again, Jeff, and please check out his shop. He does awesome work. He does all vintage motorcycle stuff, and he is very knowledgeable. So come back again, guys, because we're going to get this bottom end all finished up, the top end all finished up. Subscribe, click like, and I'll be back again with another edition of Saturday's Wrench.
Wrenching it up, gonna wrench it up. Yeah, wrenchity roo, wrench, roo.